Okay, so welcome everybody. Thanks for joining. This is our second session of the October CTO webinar series, Snappy Conversations, covering off some of the biggest change catalysts we're seeing in the market today. So today we're talking about the ever-evolving threat landscape, plus simple security strategies businesses can deploy to defend and protect. We've got some people still sort of joining on, so I'll just introduce our speakers, and by that time everybody should be on, and then we'll get started. We have the irrepressible Naren McClung, our Group CTO at Viatek. Some of you on the session will be, familiar with Naren and know that he sets the technological direction and pace at Viatek and is a big advocate of the software-defined approach to help businesses become more agile and responsive to change. Welcome, Naren.
Thank you, Prue.
Naren's joined by Pete Fraser from WatchGuard, and Pete's been in the technology and security space for 15 plus years and passionately believes that small to mid-sized businesses have the same needs and rights to data privacy and network security as the top end of town. So I'm sure he'll have lots of interesting insights. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you very much, Prue. Happy to be here.
Good stuff. And manning the chat station, we have Ian Salgado, so it's our senior technical consultant at Viatek. Ian spends much of his day with customers demoing our security solutions. He'll be answering questions live throughout the session, so do send them through. It's a good way to get the most out of the webinar. So, okay, Naren, over to you.
Thanks, Prue.
Okay.
All right, so look, as Prue said, this is the second webinar in a series. Look, it's all about change, and it's all about leveraging emerging technologies to manage change. So there's no such thing as business as usual anymore. And working with WatchGuard and all our key partners, Viatek's really about trying to work with our customers and position them in such a way that, as Prue said, they can be responsive to change, adaptive, and agile. So this session is all about the threat landscape, and we're very proud and happy to be working with WatchGuard to help deliver this. Cool. So, security today is changing, and it's fair to say that the threat landscape is changing as well. It's not just the big players or big targets that are being hit. Fair to say that phishing, as in phishing, is rife. I don't know too many. Even if I look within our own business, we see this every day. Our customers see this every day as well. So phishing is very, very real, very prevalent, and certainly a lot more prevalent today than it was perhaps 18 months ago. Crypto, again, very, very real. We have worked with many customers over, I guess, certainly last 18 months, but maybe even more specifically the last 12 months. That are either worried about crypto, if they're new customers of ours, have been hit by crypto and want to know, how they can best position themselves to mitigate that risk going forward. Then there's data breach. So I think the notifiable data breach scheme legislation has really helped to raise the prevalence of data breach. And obviously there's some very real legislated obligations on businesses that generate, I think it's 3 million revenue or more. So it's really raised the profile. Now, again, with data breach and real hacking as well, we're seeing this, so customers of ours not only worried about it, but have really been hit by this as well. They want to understand, firstly, what are the obligations around the notifiable data breach scheme and what can they do about them. And fair to say that that's all right.
Sorry, Darren, that's my fault.
Fair to say that edge controls are no longer enough, right? So when we say edge controls, we're talking about sort of traditional firewalls, maybe mail filtering, anything designed to stop something getting in. All of those things are still very, very important, but it's not enough to rest on those and assume that, with good edge controls and a really safe, tough perimeter, that you're going to be prevented from the very real risks and that changing threat landscape that we're talking about. So the best way that we sort of, I guess, categorise this or sort of help to explain this is, yes, we have prevention-based technologies that assume an understanding of a threat in order to stop it from coming in. Firewalls, anything with a signature or a definition, again, mail filtering, stuff designed to to prevent threats from getting into the environment. And the real conversation today is very complementary to prevention-based technologies. There's the one around risk-based technologies. So it's a funny sort of conversation to have because it's almost an acceptance of failure. With risk-based technology, what you're saying is that at some point, something that you've previously relied on or perhaps rely on every day is going to let you down, right? That means that a threat is somehow going to find its way into your environment, be that a live data breach, hacking attempt, phishing attempt, whatever it is. Sooner or later, something malicious is going to find its way into your trusted perimeter and expose your business to risk. So what do you plan to do about it? And almost immediately after we start talking about risk-based technologies, now customers talk to us about the need and the want to have 24/7 eyes on glass. And certainly we do have a number of customers who need that service offering and are prepared to pay for it. But affordability is key. I remember a really classic Simpsons episode when there was a volcano insurance salesman trying to sell Homer Simpson insurance, and he said, "Homer, you can't possibly put a price on your family's safety." And then Homer replies, "Well, I wouldn't have thought so either, but here we are." Right? That could be true for 24/7 eyes on glass as well. And that it's a fantastic capability if you can afford it, but it certainly comes at a cost, right? So that classic sort of risk versus reward, there's an acknowledgement that businesses can afford what they can afford, right? There's no bottomless pits of money available for this stuff. So you need to have offerings in that risk-based arena that are effective and, most importantly, affordable. So Viatek, very, very proud to be a WatchGuard partner. We're the only platinum partner in Australia, so very happy to be working with WatchGuard. It's a long-standing relationship. It's a growing relationship in that as WatchGuard's capabilities expand and improve, Viatek's very happy to be part of that journey. So with that, I want to hand over to Pete to get his perspective on some of those areas that I've talked about.
Thanks very much, Darren. And as I said before, really happy to be invited and be a part of this webinar series. As our platinum partner in the region, it's great to be working with you and your team and providing excellent security solutions to the SMB market, which, as Prue touched on earlier, is something that I'm very passionate about. So, look, before I get into the sort of WatchGuard difference, I really want to address a common discussion that I have out in the field, around the SMB and this misconception that the SMB is not a primary target of today's threats. It really is, and there are a number of reasons for that. The enterprise versus the SMB really are both targets, and because the SMB typically has a little bit less IT security spend, a little bit less standardization, and can have some Macs, some Windows, iOS and Android devices, there's a little bit more fragmentation across, that landscape. And this misconception that people in the SMB aren't part of targeted attacks, whilst they're not often part of very, very targeted attacks, they are part of the broader sort of what I like to call a cast the net attack, where attackers and hackers, be it whoever they might be, a solo single entity or an organization, really throw out thousands of emails, thousands of files and links to these files and hope somebody clicks on them. And there's, whether it's somebody sitting at a PC in an enterprise that the threat gets through the door or the SMB, it really doesn't matter. If we look at, three of the primary sort of attacks that we're dealing with these days, ransomware, phishing and cryptojacking, they're all very different, but they're not different in their delivery and they're not different in how people try to just catch anybody. Ransomware, for those that don't know, it's fairly popular these days, but essentially what happens is we're trying to get someone to download a file, get it past all the layers of defense, execute it on their machine, and once executed, it's going to go and zip up your documents, your PDFs, all your important files and hold them to ransom. Right? Because it's literally about taking money from yourself into the attacker's, pocket. So that ransomware threat delivered via a file comes in through a number of different layers. If we look at phishing, for instance, which is an attack where people literally are just phishing, even though it's spelled with a PH, they throw out thousands of links to thousands of emails and hope someone clicks on that link to then be it to download a file, harvest some credentials for a future attack, or even just gather data. Again, there's really no difference whether that's the SMB or the enterprise, as long as someone clicks on that link. And then something that's a little bit less familiar to people, which is on the rise as ransomware declines a little bit, is something called cryptojacking, which is an interesting threat, a little bit less noisy than ransomware, causes a few less problems, but still is quite highly profitable. People try and get a file into your file system that's executed, and then it uses your resources on your computer to mine cryptocurrencies while you're not aware of it. So they're trying to catch that money. And again, the SMB and the enterprise have the same resources available. So whilst there is this misconception about who hackers are and what they're targeting, the SMB really needs to take their security serious, and they've got the same needs and, more importantly, rights to security that the enterprise does, and they need that at a price tag that doesn't come with an enterprise spend sort of category. I mean, would that be something, Aaron, that you would be sort of having those discussions with your customers?
Yeah, 100%. And it's often a tricky conversation as well, because, you know, it's very reasonable to want everything. It's very reasonable to want all capabilities, all controls, all available all the time. But it's a more difficult conversation to sort of break that down and say, well, you know, here's what's available in the marketplace. Here's what we're recommending you go with, and here's more affordable. And that's really where we often have to step customers back from this sort of expectation that, you know, to have, you know, any number of security operatives sitting there, eyes on glass, 24/7, that comes at a huge cost, right? So there needs to be an answer that doesn't alleviate, you know, those needs and doesn't completely sort of ignore the risks that those customers are dealing with.
For sure, absolutely. And I guess another thing to sort of touch on is what has surprised me in this space is how quickly the market has changed and how quickly the attackers or the organization behind the attacks can innovate, right? And really what they're after is money in this environment, and that money is the same across the enterprise and the SMB. So with that, I'd like to move into this defense in depth story. So next slide, please, Prue. So one of the things we talk about when we're discussing security these days is gone are the days where an organization can say, yeah, I've got security. I've invested in antivirus, or I've got security. I have a device at the perimeter that does it, and generally I'm pretty happy with how it works. Modern threats are architected very different to yesterday's style of threats that Naren touched on earlier at the start. We used to be able to rely on a signature set. Yes, it's a virus, stop it. But now the threats come off, you know, hot off the press with a different architecture. They look different. So a lot of threats are what we call 0 day, and that is a threat that nobody's seen that makes it a lot harder to catch. So this is where we start talking about defense in depth and this layered defense approach. So the three things that WatchGuard really believes we do very well is this prevention, detection, and response. So the first thing you want to do, if it is a known threat, is obviously prevent it. Prevent it wherever you can, in the cloud as it passes through any sort of cloud-based service, at the network edge as it enters your organization, or at the endpoint as well. That's really a key component. If you know it's a threat, just cut it out. But what about these 0 day threats that I was talking about before? That's where we need to be able to use, rather than the old sort of prevention style, we need to start looking at risk-based prevention to be able to say, this file is behaving abnormally, it's structured abnormally, so we're going to start to detect these files even if we haven't seen them before. So we're going to look at hosts, files, applications, and traffic inside the network. And then obviously we need the ability to respond in real time to these threats. Gone are the days where you can now say to things, there is a potential threat, let's go and have somebody from our managed service provider look at that threat. We need to be able to respond very quickly in real time to those threats because the damage can be catastrophic. So, understanding, I won't go through it in heaps of depth, but to understand the kind of product that you need it's important to understand, how a threat comes from, somebody is like, I'm going to develop a threat to then execution. So over on the right of this slide, there's a little bit of that sort of layered approach where we start looking at how people kind of are going to hit your network at different points of time. So the first thing they're going to do is a reconnaissance. They're going to have a look at what their target might look like, who it is it SMB, is it enterprise, what sort of application security or network security am I up against. Then they're going to work out how they can deliver a threat, whether it's a ransomware style attack, whether it's phishing, whether it's cryptojacking, and then they're going to start looking at how they can run that exploit and compromise your environment. Once they've done that, then it's an extremely sort of difficult thing to understand exactly what they're trying to do. Ransomware is quite noisy, but we've got this other sort of subset of cryptojacking and those sorts of threats that are quite silent. Then they might start pivoting through your network, taking data, because data is a bit of a commodity these days and there's a price to it. So this is kind of how a threat is architected and why we need to start looking at how threats are built and then layering our defense strategy as a result of that. I mean, Naren, you guys would have seen this shift in kind of just having antivirus to now having multiple security products into your organization. You found it very quick?
Yeah, no, for sure. And you know what? So I'm often asked, we've spent quite a bit of time over the last 12 months really carefully standardizing on the vendors that we were going to go forward with and the products and services that we really wanted to major with our product catalog. And you imagine within any tech businesses, there's lots of opinions. There's lots of technologies that people are passionate about, and certainly conversations that I have and welcome within our organisation around why we've chosen what we've chosen. When I look at WatchGuard, I think WatchGuard's done a fantastic job of bringing those risk-based technologies together with those existing and highly effective prevention-based technologies. And the reason why I really like that is I have to look at what's pragmatic and I have to look at our ability to deliver a service off the back of those capabilities. So the fact that WatchGuard can bring those capabilities together and offer that through a single pane of glass for us means that we can deliver a security service and capability in a very pragmatic way. And it's a little bit like anybody that's ever done any work in the monitoring space. If you're inundated with too much information or if it's too difficult, it's almost a denial of service in its own right. So security is no different. What you want more than anything else with security is the ability to really filter out the noise and be able to action what you need to action. And the fact that WatchGuard bring that sort of real-time threat defense capability, addressing the risk-based arena, combined with those existing highly capable prevention technologies is a key reason why we partnered with WatchGuard.
Absolutely. And I'd also like to add there that, one of the reasons that we've been able to make our products, MSP friendly and architect our product set so that companies like yourself can, easily implement them and manage them is that we've always been channel based. So WatchGuard is a 100% channel company. We rely on our platinum partners. We rely on our partners, like Viatek to be able to implement this technology, and we architect our products that way. And, a key part that you just touched on there is obviously visibility, this sort of single pane of glass. When we look at companies that have multiple offices, even a single office, I like to say that you can't secure what you can't see. So visibility is a massive component in this architecture and this layered defense. It may not be a security service in its own right, but you need to understand how packets move in and out of your network and how your users are also using your network. There's this sort of, obviously attacks can come through the door, but often it's, a user sitting there that accidentally clicks on a link. So it's important to know not just what your security infrastructure has stopped and identified as a threat, but also what your users are doing inside your organization on a day-to-day basis. Because with that visibility, you can start to provide some training when people might be doing things that they shouldn't be doing. Next slide, please. So with that layered defense, in mind, this is where this risk versus prevention-based attacks. In the security industry, you never really get to remove security features, right? So antivirus, which is traditional signature-based antivirus, still has a place in IT security. If you know a threat, why not just detect it as it comes through the door and block it? The problem, as I said before, is these zero-day threats. So looking at this layered approach, one of the things that WatchGuard does and bundles into our total security offering is also provides endpoint security. So we call that, the final layer. If all other mechanisms have failed, and, unfortunately in the security industry with the way attackers and threat actors innovate, no security solution is ever 100% effective. It might be 95, 98, 99% effective, but there's always a chance one of the layers will let a threat through the door. So if a packet comes through or a file comes through your cloud security, comes through your UTM firewall and lands on your actual endpoint, that final layer of defense is a key layer to be able to look at threats. So WatchGuard has a product called Threat Detection and Response, which is absolutely key to that prevention versus risk component that you spoke about before. If you have a look at the slide on the right-hand side, you'll see a 0 to 10 scoring mechanism. And what this does is allows us to start looking at threats and files, 0, 1, and 2, relatively benign file. It may just be a file that hasn't been packaged correctly, missing some signatures in it, showing some very sort of, rudimentary but abnormal poor development behaviors. Then we move into this sort of 3, 4, 5, 6, and this is the gray area for zero-day threats. This is the area that's extremely difficult to detect these zero-day threats in this sort of middle band. And when we look at how we handle that, once we identify a file as a 3, 4, or 5, it then kicks in a number of other policies to go and check the file. One of those is our APT blocker, for instance, which will take a copy of the file, upload it into the cloud, and then execute it across Windows 7, 8, and 10 simultaneously and start to look at how that file behaves when it's actually installed. So this APT blocker detection rate is extremely accurate, has very low false positive rates. And so once we send it up to APT blocker, we can then rescore it as a 0 risk file, or we can then ramp it up to an 8, 9, or 10 and start to kick in these automatic remediation policies. And this is kind of key to what we were talking about before with a managed service provider, where you need to be able to act on threats in real time. So once we score something as an 8, 9, or 10, we can do those very familiar tasks like quarantine the file. We can roll back the registry entries. We can even do things like contain the threat or the host off the network to make sure that then Viatek engineers come in, clean that before it gets added back into the environment. And I mean, Naren, you would sort of see the value in these products as an MSP, where you can say, stop the threat, have your engineers come in, assess what's going on before you let that host back onto the network.
Yeah, 100%. And better than that, the fact that WatchGuard's able to integrate very tightly with our ServiceWorks platform as well. So again, it's about being pragmatic and efficient, really. So our engineers get all the insights they need and information to go out there and use their time in the most valuable way. They're not going out there to firstly try and understand what the problem is. They're going out there with a very clear understanding of what's happened and knowing what to do. And it's a very efficient use of our time, and that's important for us. I mean, an MSP needs to be efficient. Our engineers need to go out there and be effective with what they're doing. Ultimately, that influences the overall service quality that we're able to provide. So very, very effective and very valuable to us.
I think there's a couple of other points too with this sort of product. When we start to look and take, what we're talking about here, that layered approach, you'll see in this sort of the picture I've got here, that we're not just individually looking at files on the host, and we're not just individually looking at files on the UTM firewall. We're actually correlating events between those two. So let's have a think about how that might look. If a file gets through that is generally relatively benign, gets executed on the computer and is not hitting any main indicators, but then starts to make some strange network calls out through the firewall, We can then correlate those events and say, hang on a minute, we're seeing network activity from host X. We've got a 3 or a 4 risk assessment on a certain application that's running, and we can start to marry those two things up and then ramp that up to an 8, 9, and 10 and quarantine it and have someone come in and assess it. Also, one of the key components to this sort of ThreatSync, cloud service that we've built is that you get the benefit of security events happening all around the world. So with a WatchGuard, and this was a key driver in the NotPetya ransom attack that occurred, by the time Australia woke up and sort of started to turn their computers on and started to look at their emails, the whole of the UK WatchGuard ecosystem had seen the Petya ransomware attack because it hit the UK first, and then driven all that information into ThreatSync. And we had pretty much, in the WatchGuard landscape, no one got affected with NotPetya because we had that information in our ThreatSync cloud service. So it's an important component to understand that we use threat information from the entire world to build out a much better solution for your end customers. Next slide, please. So, I mean, when we start looking at building and architecting product for the SMB, one of the things that's really important is a very, very comprehensive but easy to understand solution when it comes to purchasing, pricing, and managing. So we have one platform and we provide total security. Our Firebox OS is able to be deployed wherever you like it. So it can be a UTM physical firewall. It can work inside VMware or Hyper-V. And we can also deploy our Firebox OS inside AWS and Azure if your workloads are being moved up into the cloud. So we have the ability to take our technology across all platforms. And then we provide this total security sort of ecosystem. So we make it very easy to purchase. And what I mean by that is it's easy for the SMB to understand what they're getting and how long they're getting it for. So you purchase it as a 1 or 3 year SKU, but this total security means that if there's some innovation, and I don't love using innovation, but that's what attackers and hackers do. They innovate and move very quickly. If there's some changes and new threats that come out and WatchGuard has to implement a new security service, either via internal development, OEM partnership, or acquisition, we move very quickly and we roll that into total security. So your SMB partner that Viatek has gets access to that technology without having to repurchase more security. So that's a key component to what we do. We allow you to get up-to-date security across firmware revisions with no additional cost across this total security ecosystem. So it's easier to purchase for the customer. It's easier to understand. We can deliver it anywhere the customer wants. It's easier for Viatek to deploy and manage across remote locations. And I know Viatek, you guys do a lot of work in regional locations, which is an important thing as well. And it's also very easy to manage. We provide cloud or on-site central management for all our boxes, which obviously gives you that kind of single pane of glass that you were talking about before, Naren. It allows you to manage these environments for your customers. And I think, I'd like your comment now, and this would be one of the key reasons why you guys have partnered with WatchGuard.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's I know this is going to sound ridiculous, but it's got to be usable, right? And it needs to be, the more efficient we can be in the way we deliver the service, the better service that we can provide, right? So software-defined technologies allow us to be more responsive, to be more agile, and those cloud management capabilities that sort of sit on top of all those great WatchGuard services and capabilities really, really help us a lot. And that flows all the way through to helping to mitigate the risks that our customers are facing today.
Absolutely. And for the SMB, that's important. And WatchGuard, one of the things that I love, personally about, my time and what I get to do at WatchGuard is that we specifically service the SME, sort of small to medium enterprise. So that is our market. And that means that our core values are to service that market and understand their requirements. And it's a beautiful thing when the company has that sort of philosophy. This is the market we address and we're going to do it well. So it's a great thing great thing for me. So next slide, please. So really, there's some key WatchGuard differences that I'd like to discuss. And there's plenty more we can talk about. WatchGuard really does move and innovate very quickly. We service three sort of key market pillars. So we do UTM and sort of endpoint security. We do wireless that has a security focus because we are a security company. Everything we do must have a security service behind it. So we've got UTM endpoint, wireless, which is an amazing product in its own right, and then authentication as well. So authentication and multi-factor authentication is really something that the SMB is being driven to have. You talk about mandatory data breach notifications these days, and that's something that is really being driven by policy and legislation that says that all organizations are going to use multi-factor authentication because a username and password is no longer enough. So they're the three market segments that we sort of service. But across those market segments, we really have, 5 different sort of key differentiators that we see in the market. And the first of those is that we provide enterprise-grade security. What we do, in our mission statement says that we take enterprise-grade security and we bring those into the small to medium enterprise and across distributed enterprises. So whether it be via development, acquisition, or OEM with, the best of breed security vendors, we look at what the enterprise does and we make sure that the SMB has access to that security because as I said in slide 1, they need the same security as the enterprise. But we also like to simplify that. And this is a key part, not just for the customer, but also for Viatek as well. A security solution can't be extremely complex. It needs to be simple. It needs to be able to say that when everything's turned on, we've got visibility across it, but it is a simple solution because otherwise people don't turn everything on. And that's just the reality of the security world, right? So by adding that simplicity, it allows Viatek to take what you as a customer has purchased and actually turn everything on with confidence, know that they've given you the best in breed security. We also like to maintain performance. So as we start to turn on security components within any of our security services, there's a resource hit on any technology. The more you're looking at, the more resource hit. So we've got some very, very good third-party testing that shows that when all the security features are turned on our firewalls, we have industry-leading performance, which is a really something that we're all very proud of at WatchGuard and allows Viatek to implement security for you as a customer, but obviously maintain the performance that you expect and need. We then correlate data. So across these three sort of market segments that we service across the UTM and the endpoint, if these were all just individual silos without sort of access to threat sync and a lot of data in the background, you have these siloed, your ability to detect threats is obviously a lot less. So this correlation across the architecture is key to you guys at Viatek being able to confidently pick those anomaly sort of security things. And then finally, we future-proof our product. It's one thing to buy a product today and you do your security spend today, but in 6 months when there's new threats that come out, you need confidence that the product that you've purchased and that your MSP has provided you is going to provide you this agile sort of security. I like to say agile security because it's got to move with the times. But it can't move with the times coming at a cost every time. And that's what that total security does for it. And I'm sure now from your sales team to your engineers, having access to that total security really breeds confidence to you guys to be able to provide good security for your customers.
Yeah, 100%. And look, I think a lot of the conversations that we're having, certainly with our existing WatchGuard customers, is what are those additional features and capabilities that perhaps you have available to you that you're not yet taking advantage of? And that's always a really great conversation. There's nothing better being able to improve a customer's security posture and not having to have that conversation around all the additional costs that they're likely to incur. So that's a great starting point, is to say, here's what you've got and here's how you can embrace the breadth of capabilities that are right there ready to take advantage of.
Absolutely.
Right,
and it's
sorry, you go on.
Yeah. Sorry, but I was just going to say, and from a a perspective from WatchGuard, we work very closely with you at Viatek, and I know Ian's on the line, but, it's a wonderful thing to be able to make a phone call, talk to the Viatek sales team and be able to say, hey, we've got some really good up-to-date security features. Let's have a chat to your customer and let's turn them on and add additional security for them. And that chat, that sort of discussion without having to make it a commercial discussion is an amazing part of our platform and your ability to deliver security. So, yeah, thank you very much for that. And I think we might have some questions, Prue.
Yeah, we do. Look, it's a nice segue. We've had some questions come in via the chat. And one from an existing WatchGuard customer who's asked, what are the main differences between the basic security and the total security?
Cool. You going to field that, Pete?
Yeah, look, absolutely. So, I like to look at basic security versus total security as not purchasing options, but deployment scenarios. See, if you've got basic security really covers what we would consider your standard requirements for security. So it's your IPS, your antivirus, your geo-blocking, your application control. But it doesn't necessarily go to that total security sort of length where you get the endpoint security. And what I mean by deployment scenarios is if you've got a UTM firewall in a data center that is not protecting any users, you don't need access to the total security component that gives you TDR and the endpoint security. But if you've got a UTM firewall in your organization and you've got 40 users sitting behind that firewall, you need that more advanced total security, the APT blocker, the ability to look at zero-day threat detection to stop ransomware, the ability to have that endpoint security. So really, they are deployment scenarios, but in the environment, basic security is what we would consider the minimum requirements to have security, and then total security covers you for the 1 or 3 year purchase and provides that advanced malware protection for your end customers.
Okay. We've had a question come in about the purchasing. So how is it licensed? How is WatchGuard licensed?
Yeah, so, look, as I said before, we really do simplify the purchasing and licensing. So our products are a licensed product. When you purchase a WatchGuard, let's say we're talking about the UTM firewall, for instance, with the endpoint security, you can buy that in 3 flavors. So standard support might be a VPN endpoint, doesn't need any security because you do all your security in the cloud or via a head office sort of architecture. Basic security, or total security, and then you purchase it for either 1 or 3 years. Now, when your time is up, you either renew the product won't just stop working, but it will stop securing your organization. So as a packet passes through it, if it's not licensed, it won't get passed through any of our, engines that are providing that security.
Cool. All right. Another one that's come through, maybe now I'll throw this one to you.
Sure.
So I recognise I have gap, ! How do I get started?
Right, okay. Look, it kind of lends to the next steps really, and I think security is a broad topic. There's a lot to consider. So what we like to do is to have a security posture conversation, and that is, let's have a conversation about the risk that your business is facing. Let's have a look at the existing controls. Let's try and map out a bit of a roadmap as to what might be most appropriate as the next step, but also what does good look like, right? So what does security nirvana look like for a particular customer? So it's really just a conversation around posture, and it's one that we like to have and have quite often these days as well. So reach out to us and let's have that conversation.
Visibility. And I've got one last question, unless more come in via the chat. How does WatchGuard help with the notifiable data breach legislation?
Cool. All right. I mean, I might start with Pete, if that's all right, and I'll hand over to you.
Please do.
All right. So one of the key talking points around NDB for us is really what does it mean, in very practical terms. And fundamentally what NDB is trying to address is the likelihood of serious harm to one or more individuals. So serious harm be that information that is personally identifiable or damaging or could be used to damage one or more individuals. So what we like, again, that WatchGuard offers is that sort of that aggregation of prevention and risk-based capabilities, and particularly the zero-day capabilities that Peter was talking about. So being able to pick up on threats real time. Fair to say WatchGuard's not your silver bullet for solving notifiable data breach. That's a much broader conversation with various obligations throughout a business, both from reporting capabilities and beyond. But certainly WatchGuard's in there with those risk-based capabilities to really help to mitigate the likelihood of serious harm to one or more individuals.
Absolutely, and you know, further to that, obviously, you know, I always like to say when it comes to things like DLP and data breach notifications that we are part of your strategy. We are not your entire strategy. So the first thing, you know, that I really think that we do and we do well is stopping the breach in the first place. So if it's a ransomware attack, if it's, you know, an exfiltration sort of attack, you know, we have a very good detection rate and we can stop that prevent, detect, respond sort of story, right? So ideally, the scenario is that the threat's not going to get through and you're going to be all good and not have to notify. But if we do look at the way threats sort of happen, mandatory data breach notification can be a lost mobile phone in some circumstances because there can be that risk and harm. So the other thing that WatchGuard does as part of your strategy is provides that visibility. So let's say there's a scenario where some form of breach has occurred that you are required to notify because there is some, you know, aspect that someone might be harmed by this. We provide that visibility to understand that threat, and that is key to the notification. If I have to notify the ombudsman about what has happened, if I don't have visibility into what has happened, how can I notify them? What am I going to tell them? So that visibility piece in what's happening inside, outside of your network, potentially how the threat occurred, is going to be key to sort of putting your notification together and then handing that off to the ombudsman.
100%.
Cool. All right. That looks like it for the questions that have come through. So I think we might, and we're on time as well, so we might wrap at this point. Thank you, Peter, for joining us and for your insights, and thank you, Naren. As far as next steps go, if you are interested in finding out more further reading, I've included an excellent WatchGuard TDR white paper, as well as a data sheet on the Total Security Suite product. And of course, you also get a copy of this webinar emailed to you in the next 48 hours. If you do have more questions, feel free to reach out to us on vtsales@viatek.com.au. Naren's on that email, that distribution list, so he'll have visibility of the questions that you ask and can jump in and continue the conversation. And if you feel compelled after this session to understand a little bit more, have greater visibility into your current security posture, we're more than happy to have that conversation. So you can do so via vtsales@viatek.com.au or contact your account manager directly. Okay, our webinar series continues throughout October. And next up, or actually tomorrow, our session is on how to simplify hybrid IT. So that's with Naren and Pat Devlin from HPE. That'll be a lively session, I'm sure, knowing both of those characters. And then at the end of the month, we're going to have a look at the Telstra ISDN shutdown and how you can approach that on your terms, even though that's the fourth change coming at you. So to register, head to viatek.com.au on the homepage, and you'll see the registration links there. Okay, guys. Thank you, Peter, again. Thank you, Naren.
Thank you.
That's over and out from us.
Thank you very much. Cheers.